So good morning, councillors. We've already mentioned that the annual plan was prepared on the basis that if there is no NZTA subsidy, we wouldn't proceed with the programme. As you may recall, the November meeting of the Public Transport Subcommittee passed a resolution that aligning with Hamilton City Council's discussions at the time, they recommended that the Regional Council considered retaining some local share in the 25-26 plan to support services. And in the discussion at the meeting, that was particularly focused on growth area services. The paper that's in your pack on page 88 identifies some of the thinking that's gone into how to respond to that resolution. And it's identified some of the parameters that are used when a new service is launched, which is a minimum of 3 years. And on the basis of NZTA's funding system, alerting council to the point that there is very unlikely to be subsidy funding for that original trial period. So any commitment that's made for new services has to be eyes wide open on the basis that it's going to be locally share funded for the whole of that minimum 3-year duration. We've also identified a potential public transport infrastructure project, which you might recall was originally funded under the SURF budgets from government, which were removed after the election. We do have some real-time signs in the transport centre, which were delivered by Hamilton City Council as part of the rejuvenation works, and this investment would continue those out across the rest of the city as was originally proposed within that SURF budget. Happy to open for any questions or discussion.
Angela. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Phil, for that introduction. Probably to shorten the day, I would like to propose that this is maybe something that we pick up in future years or not at all. Yeah, given that there are risks involved, as you said, Phil, with starting or doing services that don't get that match funding from NZTA, which was discussed when this resolution came up. Then none of the services that we've outlined in the document would tick the box. I think the intent behind this was, hey, for years we've tried to line up LTPs with our TAs. So we provide the services, they do the infrastructure. The recommendation here was in light of Hamilton City having discussions that rather than standing still in PT or going backwards, that we wanted to retain some of the momentum, given that Hamilton is the fastest growing city. However, with local government direction being what it is, and also acknowledging that, you know, this would be quite a significant rates decline if we don't do this. If we were going to look at doing anything, then the infrastructure bit, which is the 1-year commitment of 300k, would be preferred. However, not urgent either. So I'm not going to die in the ditch over this one. But, you know, acknowledge that everyone's under cost pressure and that PT is one way that we can help people in their cost of living crisis times. Also acknowledging that it would just be Hamilton City ratepayers moving forward. But yeah, I'll leave it for other people who want to have a say and then I'll come back at the end. Ben.
Oh, I just want to support what Angela's saying, which I undertake is that we shouldn't proceed with this. Page 89, item 13 sets out the risks so that the new trial bus services takes time to build patronage, needs 3 years, and NZTA doesn't retrospectively provide funding approval, so it could be left hung out to dry. So I wouldn't even recommend the 300,000. I think it's a slippery slope to get into, starting to fund buses when government's pulled out. Yeah. Thank you.
Can I just understand the infrastructure bit again? Just,
So yeah, so while it wasn't discussed at the subcommittee, when I looked through the list of projects that were identified on the original low cost, low risk sheet, the one that did stick out as being separate and being of 1 year commitment only was the funding to deliver the remaining real-time screens.
real-time screens, right?
yeah.
So helping people know when a bus is arriving and that
Yes.
sort of thing.
So we
Yeah.
under the original SURF funding, the Climate Emergency Response Fund, we did receive approval under the previous government to invest in a network of those signs to replace the old push button real-time information that we had around the city that was obsolete. We tendered for that and we picked a preferred supplier, and then the government pulled the money. The new government didn't continue with that program, so we decided we couldn't proceed at that point and that we would hold, which is why it appeared on the low cost, low risk sheet where we were looking for government to fund it through another source, and that has been declined as well.
Thanks. Got Chris and then Jen. Chris.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I support Angela. I'd like to thank her for taking a pragmatic approach to what is a difficult issue. And certainly there was no way in the world that I would be voting in support of imposing any extra costs on ratepayers if they can be any way avoided. And just for the record, this is a payback for Hamilton City for the way they wasted money over the last 4 years. And that was amply demonstrated to the minister when he drove around Hamilton soon after the last election. So that was the catalyst for this result. Thank you.
Apologies. Warren is up. Warren.
Thanks, Pamela. Yeah, more than happy to support the motion that Angela's put forward. Just not sure.
No motions today. We're just
Well,
asking for direction.
the
Yeah.
recommendation
Yeah.
and whether that moves to something like that, this possibly lays on a table further down the track for the next LTP or how that may sit, but supportive of that, understanding there is no motion. Thank you.
Jen.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I was in the background when the Future Proof Public Transport Subcommittee formed this resolution, and I totally understand the intent of it. At the time, the members were of the impression that this is the way that Hamilton City was going, and so they wanted to keep the doors open for us to work with them down that track. But now, with where we know where we're at now, I support what Angela suggested there. I do believe that this project that was being talked about with the real-time, knowing when the bus arrives, it would be a really cool improvement and a renewal of what we have to make the quality of using buses in Hamilton better still. But I support perhaps just looking at that in the annual plan and then for the next triennium, because with the costs that Hamiltonians are facing recently, it just seems right to do that at this point in time. Look forward to hopefully some NZTA funding in future to take that quality we can provide further. Yeah. Thank you.
Chris.
That's through, Madam Chair. I think so. There had been a resolution came to council which we had asked it to just lie on the table while we went through the annual plan discussions. If it is the intent of council or direction of council to not proceed, I guess we would bring it back in February at the council meeting with the annual plan recommendation.
To officially have a closing of the loop.
We need to, because it's still sitting on the table.
That makes sense.
Council meeting.
I would be keen to understand that that infrastructure bit, though, that real time I can't remember what you call that. What is it called again? Real-time screens. Why is that so hard? I don't know. I think that I'd like to see us consider that as part of the annual plan debate. It is a one-off, it is infrastructure. And
With more
and
information.
it's not an ongoing commitment. My view is it would be hard to get behind the covering local share. I think that's not a precedent that would serve us well, but I'd like us to further explore that the real-time screens and how that might benefit, and how we might provision for that. Oh, Katarina, sorry. What-
Yeah, kia ora
what-
koutou. So
Katarina.
if I remember correctly, in the long-term plan, I tautoko something on the conditions of. Looking at this area, there's no condition. It's stuck in Hamilton, so I won't tautoko this on behalf of the constituents I work with, because Waipa, Cambridge, they've just got some brand new upcoming subdivisions, and Tokoro is going to have a new subdivision. They're not in here. So I won't be looking at this as long as it's Hamilton based.
Robbie,
If you're going to come back at that at some stage, I think it's actually investigating what is the appropriate technology to put in that space. And it may be just an app on a phone or whatever it is. So I think that scope needs to be understood of what you actually were trying to accomplish. And there may be a way cheaper way of doing it. So I think that needs to be investigated.
That had been investigated, which had led to the decision to proceed with those screens at the time. And yeah, that had all come through council or through the committees. Yeah. Fair enough. Yep.
The cost of operating those things and all is coming down. So I think to rescope it is really important that you don't invest where you shouldn't be investing.
all right. What's
Just
next?
it's a question of clarification
I'm
there.
sorry, yes, Ben?
So are those screens already built but purchased, but sitting redundant somewhere at the moment, or do they have to be purchased?
We managed to stop them just before they were manufactured. So effectively the order is ready to place, the tender's in place, the costings are in place. It's a case of putting in the instruction in to commence the building of them and the installation.
But we don't have them
They're
sitting in a
not
warehouse
sitting in a
somewhere
yard.
yet.
No.
And also, if I may, Chair, just to clarify as well, we currently have them installed at the Transport Centre. So we are running the program behind as well, giving the live updates. So to roll them out throughout the city when,
Marginal cost.
yeah, it's marginal. So,
Yeah, there were
and it's
several.
renewal. So,
Yeah, there were several parts to the product. One was the screens themselves. The second was the technology to operate them, which is in place and is being used in the transport centre. And it would be effectively using that same platform to then spread the information across those other signs once they're installed.
Sorry, did you have another comment you wanted to make?
I'm really struggling because, like, I'm sitting at home and I don't catch a bus, but I imagine I'm sitting at home and I go, geez, what time's the bus coming? Oh, yeah, I can see it on my phone. Do I actually want to be at the bus stop to understand where the hell I'm going to catch a bus? That's what I'm saying. The technology has to be appropriate for the people that's going to use it. You're not sitting at home with that screen sitting in front of you going, where's the bus coming? Yeah, so why didn't
So
we talk?
we have an app. This is for if you're at the bus stop and you're standing there and you want to know, is it 1 minute away or is it 3 minutes away? That's what these signs do.
Yeah.
But anyways, what we're saying is we would like further information of how we might provision for that, should that be a decision of council as part of the annual plan.
Madam Chair.
All
just-
right,
Just
can
on
we-
Robbie's point though, going to Sydney as I regularly do these days, that app is you, and my daughter's sitting there saying the bus is 30 seconds down the road and there it comes around
Got
the
it.
corner, you know?
yeah.
All right.
If I may, Chair, just to
Yep.
prolong it, seeing as I shortened it. Yeah, Robbie, just it is a privileged place to be to have a smartphone, and a lot of our vulnerable users, older people, younger people, don't have that technology. So this was a way to broaden the scope of
Those
what's
who can
available for people.
access.
So I'll leave it there. Most
All
other
right.
places haven't.
We gotta move on. We gotta move on, people. Where are we next? Where are we going next?
The next topic is the fares review, which is on page 32 of the pack. And I'll let Brian take this one for us.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Thanks, Madam Chair. So one of the ministerial expectations set out in the 2024 GPS was that PTAs will actively work towards increasing public transport private share by the 30th of June 2027, including the setting of targets each year. To this end, NZTA on the 18th of November issued a discussion document around increasing private share to every PTA. And further to that, NZTA have written to every PTA in the country a letter setting out the interim targets that they are seeking to agree with each PTA, and that's included in the report that Phil mentioned earlier. Our concern, I suppose, or the issue for us is that we look at what's in that discussion document and we can say that we are doing, or we have done or are doing everything that the document requires. The concern, I guess, is around the scale and pace of the private share increases that NZTA are proposing. NZTA are seeking to have an agreement on the 19th of December with us, and that's something we're actively working on at the moment. We think that we'll come close to the 24-25 targets, courtesy of the 20% fare increase we implemented on the 1st of July this year, but we will struggle for the future private share increases that agreement is indicating. This was a conversation at the Regional Transport Committee last Friday, and there was a resolution at that committee to have that committee sign off a submission to NZTA on the basis of what we are doing. And I think today what we're sort of talking about is that Council will need to formulate an approach as to how we'll manage these targets, and in the application of an annual fares review in both the short and medium term. So I'll take the paper as read and I'll open to questions, Madam Chair.
Chris?
Just in response to that, the easy answer is there's two solutions: either increase your fares or reduce your costs. So I'd suggest reducing costs and you meet your targets pretty easily.
Yes, that's been clearly articulated in the discussion document from NZTA, and I guess the appetite for Council to do either of those things is what the conversation is about today.
Ben?
Yeah, just on this page 32, you've got your table, which sets out your 20% and then goes through the 3.2 million you need increased revenue, and then the total revenue is 11.2 million. So that the difference between the two obviously comes from rates. So rates are increasing each year, and the following year it's 15.6. Can you explain the table in more detail?
So there are two parts to the fare increase. The first is our annual indexation. So the report, not necessarily that table, but the report describes our estimates for the indexation as being around 6% for next year and around 4% for the year after. Then the report sets out what we thought would be required to achieve those national targets, which are in the NZTA consultation document. So we've already mentioned that we think year one is being achieved. Those numbers are for the year 2 and year 3, and effectively they say that on top of the 6%, you need to increase fares by 38% next year, and then on top of the 4% the year after, you'd have to increase fares by 40% in order to get to that roughly 27% over those couple of years. So the numbers here then, so the revenue to get from year one base revenue up to 11.2 would be 3.2, and then to get from 11.2 up to 15.6, you'd need 4.4. So that would be money from fares that we'd need to get. We'd need to increase fares by that total sum in order to achieve those revenue targets, and then those are the dollars for total fares across the region.
And then the assumptions are that there will be no drop off in patronage. The item number 5.
Totally, and we did model drop off in patronage when we came to you with the 20% fares increase. And fortunately, we haven't seen that drop off this year in the 5 months of this year so far, which is great, but that could have occurred. And our fear here is that every time the fares go up again, there could be more to achieve the same target.
So regional council will be blamed for the fares continually going up,
Yep.
which makes me actually question, in our LTP, we're looking at whether this is a good idea to do.
Through you,
No,
Matt.
it's in the long-term plan, and that we're considering it in the current year, and we've gone out.
We're considering the rating model.
Yeah,
We've already agreed to take over the rating. We're just considering the
we can
model.
change our minds on these processes. I'm just saying that
We have to
we're,
reconsult with the community on that.
well, that might be useful. I mean, what I'm saying is that we are now going to be the pariah for every time bus fares go up, which, and more than that, you're going to have district councils who are now going to be asking or demanding for increased services, and it will come back to us to rate for them.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think the point that the councillor's making is absolutely on the mark. It is a major concern. The Minister for Transport has actually called for a meeting with chairs and CEs tomorrow to discuss this. The impacts of this are even greater for some parts of the country than they are for us. If the government's hoping to increase people using public transport throughout the country, this is obviously a major impact. And as Councillor Hughes has indicated, that you have reduced costs, which actually only reduces part of the problem because it will reduce the NZTA share on the other side anyway. It's quite complex what's being proposed, and the fact it's being done not with advance notice, but in this year when all the budgets have already been set, makes it quite difficult to work through. And as I say, it's a national issue, and we're interested to see what the minister's going to say about it tomorrow as well.
Sorry, just follow up on that. Is the other point is that we're now being mandated to have electric buses, and that the buses will require electrification of depots, which will fall upon us to help co-fund. Because if you've got electric buses and you can't plug them in with petrol, you're actually required to develop all of this extra infrastructure. So it's additional costing at a time where the TAs will go, we want this, but you pay.
No.
Along the lines of what Ben's been saying, my concern is about the totality of what's envisaged. And if you look at this year's increase, next year's increase, over 3 years, you're basically at 100% increase in what I used to call the fare box recovery. And so 100% increase in 3 years for the local share. The electrification of buses, which we've said we want to put off for some time. But the global picture here to me is saying all this has been done to get rid of public transport if I was a cynic. But that's probably the outcome of what's going to happen because it will become unaffordable. And whilst we maintain in the likes of Hamilton, which I drove over the new bridge the other day and see there's a T2 lane, which is wonderful, but then it comes to a grinding halt when you cross the bridge. So the reality, the local infrastructure here in our biggest city or town isn't set up for buses. You get on a bus. Someone said to me that it took them 12 minutes to drive in with their car, but it took them over an hour to get into on the same route the next day on a bus. So why would people opt for public transport? And then you make it more expensive in a more congested environment. So reality is there's a bigger picture here that we need to address. This is chicken. I won't, there's another bit I should, but I won't. It's just rubbish.
Can I just get, I'll come to you, Warren, but can I just get, Brian, can you, because percentages are percentages, and what does that really mean if we don't know? in terms of dollar figures. Can you give me some examples of what would be the increase in bus fare for either a typical Hamilton user or more importantly, some of the regional users? So people catching the bus in Morrinsville coming into Hamilton, people catching the bus in Narawahia coming into Hamilton. What sort of a fare increase would they see?
Take that if you want.
You take that, Phil. Yes, please. Yes.
So we have a fare zone system across the region, and a single zone versus a 2 or 3 or 4 zone trip goes up incrementally. The current B card bus fare in Hamilton is $2.40. So that would rise to, let's say, $4.80, $5 based on the numbers that Ben has quoted. A trip over
Say from Morrinsville, what
so
would it be?
Morrinsville is 3 zones, so the 3 zone trip would be $4.80, so that would rise to about $10 each way.
$10 each way.
No,
See a lot less
yes.
coming out.
And
the impact is greater.
oh, sorry, so $10 each way, $20 a day to catch the bus, and you can park in Center Place all day for $10.
It's more like 20 now, but yes, something like that.
Right. So just to your point, Noel, it's essentially creating a, because what would it do to Huya fares?
So Tahui is currently $20.60 each way. That would go to $40 each way, so $80 return.
So
When you're off peak, yes, because we changed the super guide rules there.
so are we trying to get people onto the roads? Is that the that's
So can I just
right, Warren?
Yeah, thanks. So understanding, and just picking up on Ben's point, I've certainly had feedback from council staff in my region that they're petrified with any increase in rates rises. They've been abused the last time we've just risen rates and had their rate notices. So it's a real positive. It's a real thing that's happening in the world. There's a lot of stress out there with rate rises and stuff like that. So I'll just leave that there because it is affecting our staff, not only the people that are paying the rates and our staff are ratepayers too. But I noticed in the paper there's also some positives about actually. Have we spoken to our contractors and what they can do in reducing costs or getting more revenue? There's a number of talks around signage, third-party hireage, stuff like that. Is there any benefit to us from a better contractor working model? And actually, in cost recovery, etc.
So Brian's already mentioned the fact that many of the things in the paper, in the NZTA consultation document, are things that we're already doing. So we are about to tender for advertising, for example, which would bring all of that revenue directly to us. I think the workshop that you had a couple of weeks ago where we talked about zero emission also talked about the wider context there, which is that we are about to go through a whole procurement round for bus services regionally. And I think there has been some innovation in contracts and contract type that does incentivize different types of behaviour. And I think there are things we could learn as we go through that process. Some of that could be that the operators take some of the risk around revenue, which means that they are incentivized to collect revenue and not enable fare evasion and those sorts of things. So there are aspects to that we can build in, but those won't be realised until we've tendered those contracts. So we're locked into what we have.
So was there a desktop model or something that would show potential, savings and that sort of thing, and where the offsets may be, and even to the point of EV buses and their purchase and their savings long term? Sort of thing.
Yes, there is all of that, and that's the process we'll go through as we frame up the system that we'll use to procure those new services. That will also be included within that Section 17A assessment of effective, efficient value for money. So we'll be considering all of that over the next 6 to 9 months, but we don't have it right now.
And do we have, or would we have the mentality to actually use some of that, say, advertising income to help offset some of that fare increase? Is that a potential sort of mindset, or not at all? Is just
Well, I
a
think
possibility. to
we,
get
we,
more?
the reason that we're going to the market to procure advertising services is that we want to maximise the revenue from those. I don't think we'd ever do that and then accept less than a market value for that advertising. In the context of the way the agency is describing private share, those things are all in the same pot. So in effect, they've already done that for us by the way they've defined private share.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you.
All right, we do need to move on, but I've got Jen, Angela, Mikhail, and Noel. Jen.
Thanks. Just want to make sure we are definitely giving you what you need here today. So it's a little bit unclear. I feel like you're just getting our reckons at the moment on the fact that it's happened. And obviously mine are that it's quite, I don't like the way that central government treats us at times. And so, that's it. But what are we giving you what you need, or could you just specify again?
So the consequence of whatever framework we establish is that it needs to go out for consultation as part of the annual plan.
Right.
So to the extent that it needs to. We've identified here the worst case, I suppose, which is all of that cost being imposed over the short period of time that's in the current NZTA consultation document. What might happen tomorrow is that the agency agrees to extend the timeframes for us to achieve those targets, which would make those increases lesser on a per year basis. Whether it decides to change 27% to 26% is to some extent irrelevant almost. But I guess the question for you today is, do we want to activate quickly and work to achieve everything that's in this based on the consultation document? Do we want to do nothing and just carry on and assume this is an external pressure and manage it some other way later on? Do you want to see whether is there an interest in increasing our share incrementally by having, say, an indexation plus 5% or 10% type arrangement, so that we are progressively increasing share to achieve an agency vision, but we'll be making incremental progress to that over a period of time anyway. And I guess when we come back to you in February, we need to come back with something that you're all ready to then go out and consult on.
All right. So from my perspective then, I mean, obviously, were you putting out there the option to not comply with this? Is that what you were saying? That's an option?
They've been very unclear about what the penalty would be for non-compliance.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, maybe you might learn more tomorrow. At this point in time, our position, as I understand, is that we decided at the long-term plan, we would review annually anyway. I would say that people do understand that inflation, at least, is a part of things going up each year. I would lean towards the lower end of the scale, considering that it may change should the sense of that be seen of not hitting people really strongly. And obviously we look for the savings whenever can anyway. So that's my thoughts at present time, keeping in mind that you're going to learn more in the next little while, and it's a national issue.
Angela.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd be interested in any feedback you have on what's happening nationally with our regional contemporaries. And also just as Noel said, you know, is the intent here to increase congestion and get rid of PT. I'm just reminded recently, our recent consultation, one of the principles we went out with was that PT is a public good. And this feels like a complete shift from any recognition that what we do is for the public good, just to pure dollars and economic bottom line. Yeah, the real loser here would be our regional services. You know, they cover more kilometres, they cost more to operate. The fares that those people would then need to pay would you know, basically cut off all our outer towns and undo everything that we're trying to do within the region of having connected region, empowering people to stay within their townships and satellite towns, and actually to have to move where the education, where the employment is, and where the healthcare is. So it's quite distressing where this is going. Yeah. Phil, did you have any, or Brian? Where's the national conversation sort of at?
So I've been involved in sort of TSIG conversations, so Transport Special Interest Group, where all the PTAs across the country have been expressing very similar concerns. So everyone's committing to working with NZTA towards what they're trying to achieve. Everyone thinks that the targets that have been given won't be achievable. There's a range of things like that. So that's happened, and I think there's been that sort of national sort of response, I think, from PTAs across the board. We understand that if the big public transport authorities like Auckland Transport and Greater Wellington meet their targets, that'll take a little bit of the pressure off the rest of us. What we're hearing is that the overarching target, the 36 to 40% or 35 to 40% in year 3 nationally, is something that won't be moving, but what changes the interim between each year and between each PTA, that might change as well. But that's a conversation we're trying to have with NZTA, and we've got our next conversation on the 12th, so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
So we're actually having some dialogue rather than just being told what to do.
We're having dialogue, but I think what's clear is it's a discussion document, but they are quite clear that they want to make agreements by certain dates, and that's quite challenging for us because, well, particularly because we are in year 1, it would mean changing what we currently do right now, and that's not really that possible. It's probably years 2 and 3, which this report focuses on, which is really important for us. And we're not tracking too badly from a WRC point of view in year 1, but 38 and 40% fare increases in years 2 and 3 would be quite diabolical, I think, in terms of patronage, because there will be a certain point where that will drop off dramatically, and then it'll be a downward spiral too.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've considered all through when we're setting fares is that people look at it and think, oh, it's just one person. But for families, if you're sending, especially within Hamilton, multiple children on buses to get to school, that doubles, that triples, that quadruples, depending on how many kids you have. But so it's not just a single dollar amount that we're looking at.
Okay, I am going to go to Mikhail next as the chair of our RTC, but I've got Noel, Ben, Chris, and Stu. We are never going to get through this today if we're going to do this level in depth. So we need to pick up the pace, all right? Mikhail.
Well, Madam Chair, I hope to cut it short because the simple fact is through RTC, we're sending in a submission. I'd like to see what that submission does and what feedback we get from that. We're reaching the target for 24-25 because we had the fare increase, so we've got a little bit of lead time in that, and I think this decision needs to be made later on. I hear Warren's concerns about, the savings on EV. We've had all that, through Auckland and what they're doing. It's 2,000, but then you've got infrastructure, a fast charger, I think's, astronomical, the cost of that. So there's a whole lot of layers of this onion that needs to be unraveled before we go to that extent of jumping to an unrealistic target that the government's given us in a short time frame to put the submission in.
And we don't know what the minister is going to say tomorrow. There could be some new light shed, who knows? So Noel, Ben, Chris, and Stu, I'm going to ask you, do you have something new to add?
Yes.
Noel.
The question that I have arising from this is, it's around the big picture, as I alluded to before. But what is Hamilton doing? What is Hamilton doing to ensure buses move more quickly within the network? Because unless we achieve that, we're not going to improve public transport and the desire to use it. And so therefore, unless we address the big picture stuff, we are just meddling around the edges. So can someone help me? What are we doing with our partner
But
council?
what we're talking about right here is fares.
Yes,
we're
I
not
appreciate
talking
that,
about
but I'm looking
PTN.
at, I'm looking about the
Well,
longevity of
and I
fares.
would say that we can bring that up through either the Future Proof PT subcommittee or another,
Can that be addressed at some stage and come back to me then?
Yeah.
It's regularly discussed at the subcommittee.
Chris, something new,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope it's something new.
something new.
Just to give a bit of an overlay, GoBus has, through a number of acquisitions, taken over the whole of New Zealand public transport system. Therein lies the problem. There is a message which is coming from government that you guys need to negotiate much tougher with these people. They're basically dominating, they're setting the rules. That needs to be flipped on its head, and council's well capable of working collaboratively throughout the country. And all I can suggest, I'm very encouraged to hear that we have got a national group, and I'm suggesting you use that clout to hit these buggers on the head. Kinetic Group is a huge organisation making millions of billions of dollars. They own GoBus, and therein lies the problem. And that's why the government's putting pressure on us to respond and stop this pillaging the ratepayers.
Let's nationalise it.
Something new, Ben.
Yep, just a question. In terms of bidding for new contracts, when does that start?
So the discussion we had with you at the workshop the other week was we have contracts that start to expire from early 26. So there needs to be a period of establishment prior to that, which means we need to be tendering relatively soon in the next 6 months. We are looking to see if we can agree an extension of some of those contracts for a period of, I think, around 17 or 18 months in order for us to get everything in place to do this work properly, which would mean that we would start tendering late 25, early 26. So we've got a little bit of time.
A little bit of
Very
time,
much.
because obviously if fares are going to double, patronage will decline. It impacts on the whole bid for the buses.
Yes, they're all connected.
Yeah. Second question was, Jens, have you got from us what you were looking for?
Correct.
So maybe if I can replay, because I'm just making notes in terms of the feedback that we've received. So what I've heard, please correct me if I'm wrong, is for us to come back with the options and impacts across those three scenarios in terms of compliance with the increased private share recoveries, the more phased shift towards that, so the inflation plus model, or we carry on with in line with the work and the fare review policy that's being developed anyway. Reflecting a broader review of the private share revenue streams in toto, rather than just fares, so things like the advertising revenue, and then just also the consideration of need for consultation across. So if we bring that back,
And if it can include a little bit of analysis of how it might be balanced differently in different places like city and rural, or, you know, obviously some are very high, like the outer zones, it's a bigger impact, like a logical.
yeah, so
Yeah,
yeah,
thank
I
you.
think, yeah, the examples of what it means to a bus user.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the next subject, freshwater farm plan implementation. Just to give you indigestion right before lunch.
Good morning, councillors. So the history to this goes back to decisions made in 2015-16 when Plan Change 1 was going through its process of development, when this council gave the pen to the CSG to write the plan. And as part of the CSG writing the plan, the CSG put in place rules that were going to require implementation early before. And so part of that was an obligation around registration, an obligation for a digital platform to be developed for registration, and the obligation sat on this council for implementation. So the council put in place a implementation project for Plan Change 1, which required quite a bit of work to be put in place, and a team was set up, and those councillors at the time will recall the various people that were working here at the time that were working as part of that team. As Janine mentioned earlier, what the decision that was made by the council at the time was, rather than funding that work in those particular years, that it would be appropriate to share that funding over the beneficiaries of that work over time. And so it was decided to fund both the capital work to develop that digital platform and the staff that were working on the development of that implementation plan from loan funding. And so then the cost would then be spread over a period of time. As you progress through, Plan Change 1 changed as it went through the decisions version and got to a point where in about 2020, the plan was looking different to what it was. That was the implementation plan that had been developed. At that point, work paused on that digital platform. And then the government decided that it was going to be looking at doing some national freshwater farm planning, which caused further pausing. And you'll all be aware that Plan Change 1 is still before the court, and so there's still not a final version of what it might look like. However, what is clear is that there will still be some form of registration required. And so I requested the team to look back at the platform that had been developed back in between 2016 and 2020 to see is it still fit for purpose, because it has basically been sitting on the shelf for the past 4 years, to see whether or not that should be if you like, brought back into life, if that's probably the right way to put it, or an alternative solution is appropriate. You'll see in the paper the costs that the team identified for bringing that IT platform back into life. They're quite eye-watering for people like myself who don't understand how those sorts of things work. And so a report came through recommending that that platform effectively be put to bed and an alternative solution be put in place. What that means from a financing perspective, and Chris and Janine might have to help me with the legality parts of this, is that we are not going to capitalise an asset that you can't continue to rate future people to fund that asset if it's not going to be capitalised, and therefore it needs to be written off our books. And so the conversation today is around the mechanism for writing that off the books. I think you'll see in the report that the pause on doing a number of elements of this work program have resulted in the build-up of a reserve, and the recommendation is to apply that full reserve to this. But that still leaves, I think it's about $1.8 million of capital that needs to be written off. And the recommendation is that the past year's surplus is used for that purpose. Of course, the upside is that there won't be future loan payments to pay this loan back. And so you're effectively paying something off today through the past year's surplus, rather than having, I think the numbers are about $600,000 a year for the future ratepayers to pay back this loan, which was the decision that council made back in 2016. That's the fundamental story here, and happy to take any questions.
Jen.
Oh, you've outlined it quite clearly, I think, Brent. It is painful. It's always painful to write things off. I wasn't here at the time, but this is 4 trienniums ago, the decision, and why general ratepayers would pay for that in the first place is not a decision I would have supported, I don't believe, but that's the decision that was made, and I see the logic of why the surplus would be called upon to write it off. Really like to stop making software programs. I think that's come through pretty clear the last couple of years. I would invite any, there are 3 councillors here who were here back then. If you want to add context, fair enough. But I think it's pretty straightforward unless anybody has bright ideas on how else to deal with this. But this is the way it's generally dealt with in my experience.
In paragraph 48 on page 7, it talks about, last bullet point, there is a desire from central and local government to have a national data platform to hold information. So some of us have been working quietly on freshwater farm plans, but PC1 is going to come out at some stage, hopefully in the next 12 months, who knows, and there's still a requirement to have a freshwater farm plan. So whilst it's related to this topic, what I'm looking at is preventing future costs if we take the solution that's recommended. So what is the plan now to replace what's been done? Are we looking and waiting for a national program, or we're going to mirror what products are off the shelf and feed them in? Or how is this going to be addressed? Because the need to have freshwater farm plans is still there, and how is council going to deal with it? You know, so we might deal with a problem, but there's still going to be a problem. So,
yeah, absolutely, councillor. So, what is being a more system to be able to receive notification, registration is being developed as we speak. A more cost-effective solution than the solution from 7 years ago, which is based on the current requirements of PC1. But that's been built in a way so that what could be added onto it is if we need to receive farm plans through Plan Change 1, so it's going to be built in a way that will be able to deliver exactly what you've just described, our ability to receive farm plans. And so we have to do that in a way which is nimble enough that if the government puts in place a system, and if the government puts in place a national database so that it can, those things can talk to each other, you're identifying the very challenging world that we're living in right now, because we don't know what government is going to come out with in terms of a national regulation. This council previously has submitted to government on the first iteration of freshwater farm plans that they don't apply in the Waikato-Waipo region because you have a plan in place for that region. I guess it'll be up to this council to decide if you want to submit in the same way again. We are in a pretty fluid sort of national situation right now because the national database that was being talked about, it's not clear whether or not central government would fund a national database. So we can't, because there are no regulations right now, we have Plan Change 1 in front of us, which could very well become live in the middle of next year. The plan has obligations on this council to be able to do registration and then over the following 12 months to receive farm plans. That's why I asked the team to look and see, is the previous system that was designed 5 years ago still fit for purpose or not? Or is there a more efficient way of going? And the recommendation is that there is a more efficient way to proceed. We have funds to be able to deliver that more efficient situation, but we have these historic capital costs that have been sitting there for a number of years that now a decision has been made not to capitalise that asset, accounting law says we need to write those capital costs off.
Well, if I could just add to that, and Brent, you have summarised a very complicated history quite very succinctly, and I applaud you for that. The complicating thing with the national system, which once the national complicator got involved, made everything quite difficult, is they didn't only want to do a freshwater farmland system, but the government at the time decided, wouldn't it be great to have everything related to farming going into one system? You know, the idea of one person going up a driveway and everything that the government might ever want to know about what's going on a farm sort of sitting in one place. That's how complicated it got, which is why it got very difficult. We had a portal that could have sat in the front of that just to pull our information in. But I mean, John could explain this much more eloquently than me, but I'll describe it as the bucket, the container that had to hold all that information is a massively difficult, complicated thing. And with all the farmers' privacy that needs to be put across it, let alone the government agency privacy, let alone local government privacy, that's why it's so complicated. And so Brent's and the team are trying to peel it back and saying, what is that actual minimum requirement to enable PC1, however it looks when it finally comes out of the court, to fulfil the obligation that's required by this council under PC1. Have I got that right, Brent?
Yeah, absolutely. So this council needs to ensure that there is a system in place to enable landowners, farmers, to be lawful. One of those things for them to be lawful is to be able to register. And so we need to make sure that system's in place, otherwise our farmers can't be lawful. So that's critical. And so therefore the next thing is, what is the minimum viable product? It's the better way to go, the advice from all the technical folk, the better way to go is to build something small and bespoke, because that's going to be far cheaper than trying to wake up something that is using language, computer language and technology, which is sort of now 5-6 years old and has a life which is limited, because those that know more, and John may be able to explain if you've got technical questions around how technology has a life, and the advice is that we're better to put the product that was built a bunch of years ago to sleep, and then have the more streamlined bespoke product now, but based on the current understanding of the rules, because that's a cheaper option going forward. But it does have the consequence that we can't pay off that loan as was originally planned by the previous council over the next 10 years. It has to be written off the books now, because that meets accounting law.
I'm happy to support in principle what's trying to be achieved. The reality though is I am concerned, one as a farmer, but two, in a general principle of having two systems potentially, a national system and a local system, and the cost, duplication, and some of them may not be compatible. So obviously the work that we require of you is to ensure that they are compatible.
Oh, absolutely, and that's absolutely the direction to the team. And so the national system does not require registration. We're the only council that has a registration obligation. So we are building the registration part. It'll be built in a way that is, well, flexible, whether or not we need to add on something which will enable farm plans to be submitted digitally, or whether or not farm plans are set through a national system and they can then talk to each other. It's quite challenging.
Yeah,
I know you don't underestimate the challenge.
So the direction you're asking council to give you today is whether or not there's a level of comfort with writing this off. That's the direction you're asking for today.
Pretty much, because
I just want us to focus in on, because I mean, we can talk about plan change one for hours.
It's pretty clear in terms of the advice from staff is that the most appropriate way is not to use this solution that was developed in the past, and therefore that's very, very clear advice from the staff. The question then becomes, legally we have to write it off, and then how does one fund writing it off? And so that's the conversation today.
Right. So I'm just asking councillors to focus their questions on whether or not we support writing this off. I've got Chris, Ben and Stu. Chris.
Well, I'll make life pretty easy for you. We don't have a choice. Well, I'm serious. What I'd like to ask the question is, what has the regional council learned from this exercise? That's more important to me than the outcome of this $4 million debacle.
And I think we can bring that back at a
Can I
different
just
meeting.
finish, please, Madam Chair? The asset has no value. I am disappointed. I don't know when this was first recognised, but what does disappoint me is that it's just come to light now, because there should be an impairment test run on all of our assets, whether they're software, intangible, whatever they might be, every year as part of our audit process. So that does concern me, and Janine, you might care to answer that. But in terms of, we don't have a choice. It's got to be written off. It's a question of how we mitigate the loss, whether it's going to be taken out of the prior year surplus, and I'm reluctantly support that as long as we've got total and full disclosure and notes to support that along the lines that you've presented to us. Thanks, Ben. Thank you.
Right. I've got Ben and then Stu.
Yeah, so the thing that's missing for me from this document
The build of the registration tool is going to be funded from existing budgets. We will be dealing with that within the existing budgets. You'll see further down, you'll see that one of the things that we had budgeted for next year was our contribution to a national system, which would then connect in with a registration system. So there was $200,000 budgeted for our contribution to that. We have removed it from next year's budget because we don't think central government's going to be in a position to be building anything. And so staff tell me that we will, if the central government system is not going to be there, we will be able to build a minimum viable product for our farmers to be able to meet their lawful obligations within our existing budget.
And the other question was, given that we've had a lot of work done on the system so far, can we convey that knowledge to central government so when they're building their system, is there anything that's useful out of what we've done?
There was a lot of stuff that was really useful using language and technology from 5-6 years ago. Absolutely, if there's any value in that. And as Chris said, one of the things that what was being anticipated a number of years ago is that the investment that this council had made would be useful for central government. And that might mean that this council's contribution to any central government solution would be less because we were not turning up to the table with nothing. Yeah. But unfortunately, that's not how it's panned out. I know Chris spent a lot of time working centrally about having a central system and that we've got something that we have to do that could be useful for others. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to be realised.
Okay. It would just be nice if we got something out of the $3 million, that's all.
I totally agree with that, yeah.
I'm hearing around the table general support, reluctant, but general support for writing this off, but a desire to ensure that we capture the lessons learned. So I'd like us to think about how we can bring that back through to council, just so we have confidence that I don't need it today. I don't need it right now.
I wasn't going to do that. I was going to suggest that the lessons learned is around PC1 and its totality, because the process resulted in an implementation that was needing to happen in parallel. And then things changed. And so the lessons are around a PC1 lesson in totality, planning and implementation.
Stu, did you have something?
Yeah, no, look, I'm fine with where we're going reluctantly. I notice Osprey's just been through the same process, and I think
Yes.
it's probably a lot more
Yes.
expensive than this. But, and I remember Andrew Mack said to us, these projects always blow out, not this one, the other one. And I guess a question for John Crane, not today maybe, but did any of these projects ever succeed? Because my mates that are software developers have got the most bloody money to throw around and they only seem to work half the year.
All right. Hey, I want to wrap this up. Something new?
Yep, I support it, but as I said from the start, I think we should just go for dairy, we should just use the Fonterra farm plan and just put a portal on it and put what we need out of it. Don't do anything until there's some real direction from central government, because we don't want to spend any more money in this direction.
All right. I'm going to adjourn the workshop now for lunch. But we are going to be short and sharp. We're going to be back in here at 10 minutes to. Okay? 10 minutes to.